Today has been an interesting day in sports, a little bit of a rare intersection between several different events. We had TBT, summer basketball going on, with Jimmer playing, got Red Sox, Yankees in baseball, got NFL preseason football. We've got college basketball news coming out this morning. And that's all I really needed to hear, Brad, was that we had some college basketball news. And, of course, related to the FBI investigation, leaks out of Louisville reporting Rick Pitino's direct knowledge of the payment system involving Brian Bowen, allegations including him texting Kenny Johnson and referring to DePaul trying to pay Bowen $200,000 right around when Bowen was supposed to commit to the Cardinal. So that was the news of the morning in college basketball. It was enough for me to just absolutely lose it. Just such a funny story, such a strange story that DePaul was dropping the bag. I had so many questions about it. First off, but I'll just let you kind of take the floor real quick and give your thoughts on this whole saga that we saw this morning.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, DePaul was kind of the odd man out in that recruitment. I mean, you had like Michigan State was in there early, Arizona was in there, Oregon at one point, even Creighton, who's made the last few NCAA tournaments, and then you had DePaul, who was this kind of crystal ball favorite for a while, I think, before Louisville swept in there and obviously grabbed Brian Bowen. But I don't hate the move from DePaul. I mean, you got to get talent to climb the Big East standings however you can. It just looks real embarrassing when you hire the high school coach in Shane Herman and you get a lot of his former high school teammates on the team, and then you can't even grab him by offering him twice as much as Louisville offered, and clearly money played a factor there. So just another hit for DePaul. I don't know if they're going to face any sort of ramifications. I don't know if they can really prove anything that Rick Pitino was saying to the point where DePaul could face some sanctions, but definitely an interesting situation to monitor.
Yeah, I think my first thought was, wow, this is classic DePaul. My second thought was, if this is a way for them to get out without having to pay Dave Leto, and they can move on either right now or next offseason in a fire for cause situation where they can kind of invest everything they've got in a new hire. And I think the thought process has long been that they could go after Porter Moser. I don't know how realistic that is. I don't know why Porter Moser would take that job. But if it gets out from under Dave Leto, that would be an intriguing thing to monitor. Although Romeo Weems' presence probably makes them safe. I will point out, I saw a pretty good tweet from a guy named Mike Marshall, who tweeted this to me this early afternoon, and he said, also worth pointing out that Bowen's camp had a vested interest in making Louisville believe that the Cardinals had to up their offer. Now, that's a fair point that I hadn't really considered, was how real do we think this $200,000 is? Because, I mean, to a certain point, who's paying the $200,000? I don't think DePaul doesn't have a strong basketball program full of fans that are, or I mean, I'm sure they have boosters who are willing to fork over money, but I don't know if they have $200,000 just lying around. And I don't imagine that Nike's out here dropping the bag to get a kid to go to DePaul. DePaul is definitely not a top tier Nike school. Nike doesn't need DePaul's power in Chicago, given they have such a strong ties with Simeon in the high school ranks that they have with Mean Streets and McIrvin Fire in the AAU ranks, and that's allowed them to send consistently kids to Duke and Kentucky and Illinois, if we consider that most high school recruits are getting the bag, if that's something we believe. I don't see the need for Nike to get into this mix here. I think that's what's kind of implied, though, by these paperwork. So it's a lot of interesting stuff that we can kind of try to draw conclusions from, but we don't really know. It'll be interesting to monitor, definitely. It was a nice little news story, though, for us to start our morning.
Yeah, a few things on that. I'm pretty sure that DePaul is the biggest Catholic school in the country. So they could have a pretty large endowment. Presumably they have some pretty wealthy boosters, being in Chicago. Maybe that's how they get the $200K there. But I think it is more likely that the offer that Pitino thought DePaul made was either very inflated to drive up Louisville's offer, like the guy who tweeted you mentioned. I also don't understand. I can't wrap my head around how this amount of money that are going to these highly ranked players is really going to pay off in the long run, like for the school. Like does I mean, maybe DePaul getting a guy like Brian Broen could elevate them enough to maybe generate $200,000 in additional revenue over like a two-year period, or however long he stays. But I've I've seen a lot of people throw out numbers for like guys like Marvin Bagley like being worth like in the 2 million to 3 million range for his one season at Duke, and especially those bigger brands. I think so much of the appeal of these big brands like Duke and Arizona isn't really their players, but is kind of like that brand equity that's been established by past players. So I don't see how like paying Marvin Bagley $2 million, like if that's what he's worth, if guys were allowed to pay players in like an open market, like Olympic model, I don't see how that would generate like a positive, ROI for Duke or any of these other powers. And then just one last thing. Lastly, I was listening to the Gary Parrish show the other day. I try to whenever I see the link pop on Twitter, I try to listen because he's one of my favorite college basketball kind of analyst talker guys. And he presented a story of he was talking to various coaches about who's the best coach at getting out of a recruitment when they know that they're out, and who's the worst. And he said that the best coach that like won't waste time on guys who have no shot of going to their school was Jamie Dixon. And he said the worst, which I found very interesting, was Dave Lato. And he said that's pretty much why he got fired at UVA, because he'd spent all this time and resources recruiting guys with chance of getting, and he didn't know that. So it's just kind of that like disconnect from like a reality, or like having an accurate perception of recruiting could be costing Lato a second job now too.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting point. I do want to just go back real quick to your thought regarding kind of player value, and just touch on quickly the fact that DePaul has been in such a low point. You're talking about Dave Lato's job on the line, athletic director's job on the line. You've got a new stadium was worth over $100 million invested. Now, that wasn't all funded by DePaul, but at the same time, this would have been the perfect piece as a big splash coming in. Was a late 5-star to really bring life to the program. Now, I don't know that it's worth $200,000, but when you're not the one footing the bill, if Nike's footing the bill, I mean, I'm sure you wouldn't complain if Nike wants to drop the bag like that. You're not going to have to call in a bunch of these. If you have a chance for one, you're going to take it when you're a program like DePaul. So I guess that's my 2 cents. I don't really have much more on this. I think it's a really interesting thing to monitor. And I think the point you made about Lato, maybe not really understanding his realistic recruits, is a real flaw in a coach, and a real flaw in, I think, a lot of coaches in college basketball.
And then before we start doing our deep dive on Iowa State, I don't know if you saw the group of guys invited to the Chris Paul camp, but there are a few really good names on this list of future prospects, guys like Kai Bowman, Lindell Wigington, who we'll talk about later, Nikhil Alexander Walker, who's one of the few off guards in this group, a guy Kellen Grady, who's gotten a lot of publicity lately, Tremont Waters. So there's a lot of good talent there. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that camp, or if you saw that roster yet.
I saw that roster mostly because I had Murray State fans kind of retweeting and tweeting about it all day because of Ja Morant and all the hype about him. It's always a fun thing to look at. It's always good for these guys. I always like seeing, especially the mid-major guys who don't necessarily get the attention. So like a John Elmore, a Clayton Custer, a Ja Morant, Justin Wright Foreman, Kellen Grady, as you mentioned as well, and then Ronshad Sabaz from Appalachian State. So they get a bunch of guys in between these high major guards, these low major, mid major guards, combined with some top college recruits like Cole Anthony, Zion Harmon, Davion Harmon, Tyrese Maxey, list goes on and on. Noah Farrakhan. I'm just listing names that I could think of off the top of my head. So it's definitely a good opportunity for these guys to learn, and always a good time to get some overhyped stories coming out. I know there was a lot of like John Davis hype last year at one of these camps. Miaoni got a lot of hype from Yale. So it's always a fun little time of year in kind of a deadish period of college basketball.
I remember reports from, I think, 2 or 3 seasons ago where Travion Graham was dominating this camp, and it was kind of weird why he was even invited. Like, it's a camp for point guards, and he's clearly like a 3-4 in the NBA. But I guess he just like overpowered everyone, just like bullied all the other guards. So yeah, it's always really interesting to get some mid to late summer reports out. Anything that you want to touch on left before we get on to Iowa State?
Not really. I mean, I saw that Sam Cunliffe basically said he's going to Washington if Mike Hopkins will take him. I thought that was like at least discussable news, but since it's not really finalized, I don't think there's too much to go on that. And then I saw George Mason started their international trip games, which was like the first international trip game result I had seen. They won their game like 12 to nothing, or 12 by 12 points. What did I say? 12-0. They won by like 10 or 12 points. So I didn't see any stats that were like all that impressive, but I'm sure we'll see plenty of stats over international trips that will make people discuss things like this.
Was their game streamed at all?
No, it was not streamed. There was a bunch of Twitter highlights from the George Mason Twitter page that I watched. There wasn't really anything that was like too great that I saw. I noticed Jared Reuter had a couple of good passes out of the post. He looked kind of small though. I know he's listed at 6'7". He looked pretty small, but he's very well built. So
there was an all-star game for like high school prospects at my high school maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and everyone's like dunking like Donovan Mitchell and Abdul Malik Abu are like dunking like in the game, and like Jared Reuter's doing like backboard claps on like layups.
Love to see it. Let's get into our deep dive.
Yep. So we're going to start with Iowa State, who had a pretty rough 2017-2018 season. They finished 4-14 in Big 12 play, 13-18 overall, which I was very down on them coming into the year. But even they were even a little better than I thought that they would be. They were pretty competitive in a lot of games. I know that's kind of what you say when the team's not very good. You kind of promote that they played teams close. But they started the season poorly with a loss to UW Milwaukee, and then they found some success moving Nick Babb to point guard and shifting guys like Donovan Jackson and Lindell Wigington off the ball. Injuries played a pretty significant factor throughout the season. Everyone missed a game, like at least one game, except for Lindell Wigington. Guys missed as many as 10 games. So just having that kind of lack of lineup continuity is probably another reason why they were so poor in 2018.
Yeah, I think coming off of that, going into the season, I expected a little more record-wise from Iowa State. I thought they'd be kind of around 500 in an NIT team. But by the end of the season, when I was watching them, I thought they exceeded my kind of expectations for them. The just league around them was so good. It was just there was a lot of tough matchups. They weren't very good on the road in the Big 12. No one was good on the road, but them especially. So, I mean, overall, though, I really like the direction that this program's heading over the next this year and next year, especially as they build around this youthful core that we'll touch on in a little bit.
Yes, there's a couple other notes about just kind of their style of play from last season. So they weren't a particularly good rebounding team, even though they played primarily with 2 big men. They played Solomon Young at the 4, who was the previous year when they went to the Sweet 16. He was their starting 5-man. And they had Cameron Lard there at the 5. And this lack of spacing that kind of resulted from this two big man pairing really stood out. I was watching some of their games a few days ago in preparation, and there were times where like Nick Babb would get into the lane and like kick the ball out to the perimeter, and it would go to Solomon Young, who would have an open 3, and he'd just have to move it because he couldn't really shoot from distance. I think he shot like 16% or something from 3. and I'm guessing most of those were kind of in the same vein where he's so open that he just has to shoot or else he's just killing the flow of the offense. But it seems kind of based on the guys that they've added, that the team's becoming a little more perimeter oriented, a lot more like kind of versatile, switchable, like multi-positional wings. I know a lot of their incoming class, which I'm sure you'll touch on in a little bit, is very kind of versatile and like switchable oriented. And then they were 325th in a minutes continuity last season, which is one of the main reasons why they stumbled so far. I think they were sub 100 in KenPom overall, and they obviously lost Deontay Burton, Monty Morris, and Naz Long, who are all in the NBA now, and then also Matt Thomas, who I think had a very, very strong rookie year over in Europe.
Yeah, I'll touch on these newcomers, and I think the words you mentioned with versatility is really the best way to describe this class. I'm really high on this incoming group. So there's 2 sit-out transfers becoming eligible, 1 sit-out transfer who will be sitting out this year, and 4 freshmen. The 4 freshmen, the headliners, Talen Horton-Tucker, the Chicago product, whose recruitment was obviously muddied by the fact that he wanted to commit to Illinois and was told he couldn't because Ayo Dosunmu was headed there. He heads to Iowa State, and I don't think Steve Prohm could be any more happy. Horton-Tucker's a fringe top 50 recruit. Bit undersized for the position he plays, but has point guard type skills, very versatile type of player who I'm really excited to watch, especially against next to Nick Babb, who I think is a fairly similar type player to Talen Horton-Tucker. They definitely have some differences, but there's definitely some overlap in their games. Zion Griffin, who's also from Illinois, out of Hinsdale South, kind of a versatile wing at number 124 in the composite, a 4-star recruit who's another really nice piece. Big point guard combo, Tyrese Halliburton, 171 in the composite rankings at 6'5", 170. I think he probably has the toughest path to minutes on this roster this season, although even he could find his way into the rotation. And then George Condit, who is number 327 in the recruiting rankings. I think that's low, given what I saw from him at FIBA and what I've seen from him in the past. Chose Iowa State over New Mexico, and I believe Illinois. He's another Chicago kid who's very athletic, 6'10" kid, very bouncy. Doesn't have that offensive game down yet, but he's going to help them on defense right away. They had 2 guys sitting out last year, Mariel Shayok, the sit one, play one out of Virginia, competitive defensive wing who can score it a little bit, as well as Michael Jacobson comes over from Nebraska. I don't know how much Jacobson will find the rotation, but he's a useful player with experience in the past. I'm trying to pull up his statistics right now. He's an Iowa native, averaged 6 points and 6 rebounds at Nebraska, although pretty inefficient shooting the basketball at 6'8". And then finally, Prentice Nixon from Colorado State, sitting out this season after averaging about 16 points a game for the Rams this past season.
Yeah, and I think that Nixon, his style is very similar to Lindell Wigginton's, that maybe they expect, Wigginton to leave after this year and just plug Prentice Nixon right into that spot. Yeah, we kind of touched on this earlier, but the kind of the key long-term move for this team was moving Nick Babb to point guard, where he was really effective. He averaged almost 7 assists a game. He's a steady point guard with great size at like 6'5", and he has very good vision. He's not like an explosive athlete, and he's not a great shooter, but he can really probe the defense and get into the paint and either score at the rim himself or find shots for others. And then Wigginton, like moving him off ball and kind of transforming him more into a scorer who can play in some pick and roll, be that secondary ball handler, but like focus on scoring and shooting is really an advantageous position for him and for Iowa State. I think that's a really good backcourt combo. And then rounding out that perimeter trio with Mariel Shayok, I really loved him at UVA. I always wish he got more playing time there, but that's kind of just the super deep team that they had. He's a versatile wing player who can create who can create his own shot, I think, more than he showed at Virginia. And he's a multi-positional guy who can shoot the three. I think that's a really strong three-man perimeter starting unit right there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I am begging Iowa State to play. I wouldn't necessarily call it a 4-guard look, but I am begging that they play. That we see some Wigington, Weiler Babb, Shayok, Talen Horton Tucker, 1, 2, 3, 4 lineups. I don't know how they'd match up defensively, but Horton Tucker has that super long wingspan. Babb is very switchable. Shayok can defend multiple positions. The Big 12 is generally a smaller league this season, especially, and then you play Cam Lard at the 5. I love the potential of that lineup. Maybe I'm just a 4-out 1-in type of homer, but that's my favorite potential lineup for this team. But you could see that 5, or you could see, I think, Solomon Young start at the 4 again. Those are probably the 2 most likely starting 5 groups. And then you'll have either Young or Horton Tucker off the bench. You'll have a big man off the bench in Jacobson. You'll have Zoran Talley, who comes back for one more season, who's kind of a versatile combo forward wing. Zion Griffin can factor into the mix. So they've got the pieces to me to go 8-9 deep pretty comfortably, which is why I'm pretty high on this club. I'll be quite honest. I think they might be a top 25 team.
I actually agree with you. They're a team that I think is top 25 caliber. When I was making my first top 25 the day of the championship, I expected for them to be in there. But I mean, the top 25 can only have 25 teams. So I have them in that first 5 or 7 teams right outside the top 25. But I really love this team's talent. I'm a big Cam Lard guy. I mean, he's just a power player. He loves contact. He's great at sealing off his defender and finishing in the paint. He's a very explosive player. He blocks shots. He rebounds. I love him at the 5. I really hope that they don't go back to the Solomon Young and Cam Lard look together. I know that with all the injuries, especially to a guy like Hans Brass, who was more of a stretch 4, who wasn't ever fully healthy, it seemed last season, that they didn't really have the pieces to kind of play their most optimal lineup. But now that they have a lot of depth and they have a lot of versatile kind of small ball 4 types that can either add more floor spacing or a little more athleticism in ball handling, I don't see any need for them to do it. So I really hope that they don't. I mean, Young played 27, 28 minutes a game last year. So kind of moving him to solely be Cam Lard's backup might not be realistic, but I agree with what you were saying earlier. I would love to see Talen Horton Tucker there. I think Zion Griffin could be the best fit among all the players just based on skill set at that small ball 4. And then regarding Zoran Talley, do you think there's any chance that he could start at that 4 spot? He only shot 29% from 3, but he is a solid mid-range player. I wonder if he could maybe extend that range.
I would generally think that if they wanted him starting, they would have started him over Solomon Young last year. Although they needed more the wing depth from Zoran Talley than they needed his front court depth, given they had Jeff Beverly. They had sometimes Hans Brest. As you mentioned, they had the 2 bigs that were starting. So I generally don't think so. I think Horton Tucker and even possibly Zion Griffin are talented enough that I expect them to at least be able to produce at the level that Zoran Talley did. But he's certainly a valuable reserve in that he can play 2 through 4, very athletic, can help in when they press. I mean, I'm not too concerned about them playing 2 bigs this year, just because I think, Steve Prohm hasn't been that guy most of his college coaching career. Iowa State hasn't been that type of program most of his career. I don't think it would make sense. I think playing both Young and Lard would be shoving a square peg into a round hole. I don't think that's what Steve Prohm is likely to do. But I mean, if we go back to this idea of a Babb, Horton Tucker, Shayok kind of trio on the wing with Wigington as the 1, but more of an offensive 2, you're just talking about so much switchability, so much length, so much physicality. I mean, Babb and Horton Tucker are both very well built players. Shayok's very strong. I just love the versatility that group can bring, and all of them have shown the capability to shoot the three pretty comfortably. I know it's not a ton of attempts, but Horton Tucker shot 33%. I have down during EYBL with Mac Irvin Fire. You have Shayak who shot 33%, also on fairly limited attempts, but I would expect that kind of improve from his Virginia days. And then Bab, who was also lower attempts guy, but shot a solid 30, not about 32%, 33%. So I just love the kind of the versatility that lineup would bring. And I agree that probably right now I wouldn't put them above. It probably wouldn't put them in the top 25, but they definitely have top 25 talent. My big question for you is, what do you expect from Lindell Wigington this year? I think we kind of know what Bab is. We almost know what Cam Lard is, but he's the guy who we're really looking forward to seeing. I think most of college basketball is looking forward to seeing. Where do you stand on Lindell Wigington this season?
So he's certainly the X factor for this team because he's being so hyped up by college basketball fans. A lot of people see him as like a potential like first round pick even in the NBA draft. I know that there were some rumors that he had like a second round either promise or heavy interest last year, which I would have been very surprised, for him to come back to school with such a firm kind of offer or promise or interest or whatever was being reported. I think he could get up close to 20 points a game, maybe closer to 17 or 18 than 20, but he's certainly an excellent scorer. I love him in the pick and roll. He can make some really strong passes out of that, which is always a big thing in terms of kind of maximizing your potential as an offensive player. Being able to handle the ball and create shots for yourself and others in pick and roll. So I think he's probably, if not Big 12 first team, then like one or two players outside that. Let me just pull up who I had an early pick for Big 12 first team. Yeah, so you can make a case for like maybe 9 or 10 different players, and he's certainly in there. I think in terms of like being on that first team, I think he's probably behind guys like Dedrick Lawson, Sagas Kanate, these veteran players like Barry Brown, maybe even Udoka Azubuike. So I think he's a borderline first team all Big 12 player for the short answer there.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much where I am as well. He has to take care of the ball better. You can't have, even if he's more of a 2 than a 1 offensively, you can't have a backcourt player with a sub 1 assist to turnover. That's just not gonna fly. I think this team overall just needs to improve defensively. Now, part of that was playing 2 small guards in Wigington and Jackson a lot, and they'll improve just by playing a Shayak or a Talon Horton Tucker at that 2 guard spot, guarding 2s rather than having a Donovan Jackson. Defense hasn't been a Steve Prohm staple, but it certainly has to go up if they're going to contend next year.
Okay, so we have a pretty set in stone starting lineup between Bab, Wigington, Shayak, Horton Tucker, and Lard. So who do we think are these 4 players that are going to come off the bench and play consistent minutes? Personally, I think Solomon Young is a shoe in there to be that backup center. That's 6 players. I think Zoran Talley has a very good chance of making that rotation and playing the 3 and the 4. So that's 7. So we have 2 left. Personally, I think I'd go with Terrence Lewis, kind of have a bounce back sophomore season after he didn't shoot the ball very well. But he is a very athletic wing. And then Zion Griffin, who I think could be the big sleeper in this class. He's a great athlete, and I think he's probably I mentioned this earlier, but I think he has the skill set that fits best to kind of play with those starters as a small ball 4, and maybe even you experiment with a guy like a Talley or a Horton Tucker at the 5 for stretches at like a very small but very versatile lineup.
Yeah, I'm I'm kind of trying to figure this out here because with Young, when you're going to play four guards, you're going to definitely have Young as a rotation big. But do either Jacobson, who was a productive player at Nebraska in terms of cleaning the glass, if nothing else, and Condit, do they have a chance to crack the rotation? Definitely not both, maybe one. I think Condit has a sneaky chance as like a rim protector and just energy player. Jacobson doesn't really provide that. But Jacobson's experience, so I'll probably lean towards him at least early in the season, getting a rotation spot. Zoran Talley. I think Halliburton actually might find some minutes, if nothing else, just because he's a guard who's more comfortable handling the ball. Depending on how much they trust a guy like Horton Tucker to run the show at times, they're going to need another guy in the backcourt who they trust to put the ball on the deck. Given that Lyndall Wigington can't play 40 minutes a night, even if you're going to play Bab as kind of your pseudo one. You still want another guard next to him who handles the ball well, and is like a pseudo point guard. So I think Halliburton could find that spot, and then Zion Griffin I think will definitely find the rotation. So that's probably my 9 would be the 5 stars we mentioned: Griffin, Halliburton, Talley, and Jacobson. Or no, Solomon Young. Excuse me.
Yeah, I agree on Jacobson, where probably 75% of the teams among high major basketball, he's in the rotation as like a backup center. But I just don't see how he plays over Lard or Young, and I don't really see why they would go back to two bigs because he's not really a floor spacer. So I just don't see where he fits in. I think he's certainly good enough, but choosing Iowa State was kind of a strange move from a playing time perspective. He's someone who I could see play this year and then grad transfer out somewhere. And then Condit, maybe he's definitely a more long term piece. Maybe he redshirts. And then in terms of Halliburton, I just left him out of the rotation because I think that maybe Wigington could get those backup point guard minutes. But I mean, he does fit their kind of their new MO of these like long, switchable kind of positional, guys with positional size, and he is ranked in a spot where could go either way in terms of getting minutes year one. So I would expect him to probably play more in the non-conference than in conference play. But for me, he's right on that outside looking in of the rotation.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty fair. Overall team outlook, I think we both agree this is an NCAA tournament team, Brad.
Yep, I have them borderline top 25. Actually, I have them as an 8 seed, which puts them in that 28 to 32 range, I believe, or 29 to 32 rather. And then I have them fifth in the Big 12.
Yeah, I think there's a big kind of tier in that 3 to 7 range of the Big 12. It's going to be kind of really hard to predict, and I think that's where I have them right outside the top 25 in the NCAA tournament. Where are we on Steve Prohm? I do think it's kind of good to look at coaches. Where do we? This will be year 4. Had 2 pretty successful seasons where he finished this season in the top 25. Has obviously had incredible success at Murray State before that. He had the 31-2 season in year 1, and then solid 3 more years before these 2 good years at Iowa State, and then last year's kind of clunker rebuild. I think long term he's the right guy for this program, and he's going to continue to do a pretty good job, though.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say he's on any sort of hot seat or anything. I mean, he went to the Sweet 16, and then in 16-17 he was in the round of 32. So I mean, that's a real grass is greener on the other side situation there. If they were to like fire him, say if Iowa State disappoints this year, if they fire him, there's a pretty good chance that you might not get the same level of coach coming in. I mean, he has like a pretty sterling reputation from his time at Murray State in terms of building a winner there. They had that famous season with I think Isaiah Cannon where they were 31-2 or whatever. So yeah, I would certainly say he's definitely safe. Certainly more safe than Tim Miles, who we touched on last week.
Yeah, the only like unsafe thing is I would consider him in like the you're away from being a potential hot seat guy where, like, if they miss the NCAA tournament this year and then all of a sudden, like, you lose Wigington potentially to the draft, you lose Babb, you lose Shayok, you enter a season where it's like you may be missing pieces and you're not necessarily expected to do much and you've missed the tournament 2 years in a row. It's really hard at a basketball school, and that's what Iowa State is, to maintain after missing it 3 in a row. That's looking way far ahead, given we both think this game is going to be really good this year. Overall, I think we both agree that this program's in the right track with Coach Prohm, and obviously you never know what could happen. Things change quickly. I know that was one of the things I've noticed with Danny Manning, which is how quickly tides turn. We went from what a great job he's doing to he sucks in a year. So obviously you never know what we'll be thinking in a year, but I think right now no reason to suspect anything bad of Steve Prohm. I think Iowa State's in the right direction as a not a Big 12 title contender, but definitely a second weekend NCAA tournament team contender, I think.
Yeah, it all comes down to early entries. That's where coaches are made or broken. Between like Mark Fox at Georgia, Danny Manning at Wake got hit really hard by early entry. If you're not a like traditional blue blood and you have a lot of early entry guys, especially from guys that you don't expect, like the John Collins who had a breakout year, like Doral Moore, that's really where things came to go downhill in a hurry. And with that, I think we'll move on to New Mexico, who last year had kind of a surprise finish. They were 19-15 overall, but they were 12-6 in the Mountain West. Actually made the Mountain West final before losing to San Diego State. They have lots of roster turnover, which actually might not be a bad thing for this year. Paul Weir loves using his bench. They were like 14th in bench usage. No one played more than. Well, their leading minute guy was Joe Furstinger at 27.1, which is pretty low for your leading minutes. And they regularly play 10 guys.
We had a bit of a connection error, Brad. So do you want to just restart everything on New Mexico there?
I just kept going, so I will restart. And if for some reason people heard that, you'll hear it twice.
I heard almost nothing, so just give it a go. If people want to listen to it again, they can.
All right. So New Mexico last year had a surprise finish. They were 19-15 overall. They were 12-6 in the Mountain West, which is the big surprise. Lost in the Mountain West final to San Diego State. They have a lot of roster turnover, which actually might not be a bad thing for this year. They were 14th in bench usage, so Paul Weir definitely likes to play a lot of different guys. Last season, their leading minute guy was 27.1 minutes a game, which is pretty low. That's for Joe Furstinger, who is a senior big man. And they regularly played 10 guys. 8 guys averaged at least 20 minutes a game. This is a very strong offensive team. They played very fast. They shot the three extremely well, but their defense was exceptionally poor, especially on the interior, where a lack of positional size and a lack of size in general was kind of a major factor. But that should be remedied this season with some of their additions. They forced a lot of turnovers, but the size kind of reared its ugly head again as they were killed on the glass on both ends. And so, Kevin, do you want to take over and go with some of their guys who were coming into the program?
Yeah, I'll hit those in a second. I just wanted to kind of touch on your synopsis because I think it was really well done. Their defense is really a full court, heavy pressure defense that relies on turning you over. That's going to put themselves in bad spots, and especially when you have that lack of positional size and you don't have that center who's a good rim protector who can break up a lot of plays on the back end. You're going to have some trouble defending. Especially when they played 10, but they didn't love their 10, if that makes sense. Where like they didn't have their group of 10 that they played was more, you have to play 10 to play the system we're playing, not I have 10 guys that we want to play Mountain West basketball. And so from that perspective, I think their defense has a chance to be much improved this year. Walk you through the newcomers. 2 guys sat out last season. I'll hit on those because they're the biggest names. Actually 3. If we count Carlton Bragg. We had Jaquan Lyle, 11 points, 4 boards, 4 assists a game at Ohio State. Numerous troubles off the court dating back to his time as a recruit. Finally catch up to him. He transfers down to Albuquerque, fresh off sitting out a year. He's going to be really good. Vance Jackson, 6'8", 6'9", combo forward who thinks he's a guard, high-level shooter. Have to see him attack the rim more because he's so physical and so good when he wants to be. I think he just hasn't done that yet in his career at UConn and really as a high school recruit either. Carlton Bragg is eligible mid-season at this point. That may change. I believe they're appealing that decision. He is the former 5-star recruit at Kansas. Numerous off-the-court troubles. Winds up at Arizona State, leaves there before ever playing a game, resurfaces based on directory information at New Mexico that shortly there gets released that he is transferring there. And so that's certainly an interesting player to watch. Then they have one guy sitting out this year, Zane Martin, averaged about 20 a game at Towson. They have 3 JUCO players coming into the roster. Corey Manigault, combo forward, transferred in from he was a JUCO player originally. He went to Pittsburgh, transferred after the Dixon. He was a Dixon recruit who then went to Stallings, played 1 year there, didn't get much run, and then transferred out to JUCO. Kareem Ezzedine, who's a French big man, signed late. He'll give them something on the defensive side of the ball out of a good JUCO program, Northwest Florida State College. Keith McGee, who's a 3-year JUCO, actually from New York originally, had a big finish to the season in JUCO, won I think most outstanding player of like the national tournament at South Plains College. He's kind of a combo guard who can score the ball, and then 2 freshman scholarship players in Tavian Percy, who was a late signee from LA, who's a wing, and Drew Drennan out of Florida, who's a point guard, combo guard, who can score the basketball, former high-level recruit whose recruitment kind of stagnated and he chose New Mexico in the early period.
Yeah, so you touched on earlier that Paul Weir played 10 guys, but it was more of a product of like the system and not a product of the depth. Do you think with this new influx of talent that that they have 10 or 11 guys that he would think are Mountain West players and can play, or do you see him kind of trimming down the rotation and playing some of these proven better players like a Jaquan Lyle, like a Vance Jackson, even like an Anthony Mathis who shot the lights out last year, playing those guys more?
I think he'll ride the starters slightly more, just because he'll have guys who are more talented. I don't think the talent gap was as big from starters to reserves as it will be this year. But he played a lot of guys at New Mexico State when he was there. I'll try to pull up the stats on exactly how much guys played. But he wasn't a guy who was running his starters. The team overall wore down that year at New Mexico State, just because they ran so much, and they didn't quite have the depth. Ian Baker played 32 a night. Other than that, no one played. They also had City and Deer at 29 minutes a game, but he only played 9 games. They were a team that relied on depth. They had a bunch of guys in that 18 to 25 minute a game in that 2016-17 team coached by Paul Weir. I think they're 10 deep, though. Just looking at it, because Lyle can definitely play. Keith McGee can definitely play. Anthony Mathis can definitely play. Vance Jackson can definitely play. Maluach can definitely play. Bragg can definitely play. You can find minutes for Drew Drennan in small lineups. You can play. I think Manigault is a rotation level player, and even Vlad Pinchuk gave them minutes last season that were at least tolerable. So I think they're in that 8 to 10 deep comfortably of Mountain West level players for this season. Although I think some of the top tier talent may separate itself and find its way more into like the 28 to 32 minute range rather than the 23 to 27 range, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that the kind of the big kind of theme around this New Mexico team is 3-point shooting. They're going to play. Mathis shot 47% from 3. Maluach shot 46. Vance Jackson's an excellent shooter at the 4. Jaquan Lyle's a capable shooter. He's more of a scorer, like a big physical guard, though, at the 1. I'm actually very high on Jaquan Lyle. He was very up and down at Ohio State, but he's super talented. He has great size. He averaged double figures in the Big Ten, but he just had some decision making woes as the point guard, which kind of left him falling out of favor with some Ohio State fans. I think the big question for this team is at the center position, where you have this Pinchuk who's back as, I believe, a sophomore who was in the rotation last year. But if Carlton Bragg can step in and give them quality, 25 to 28 minutes a night at a high level, like what people had anticipated for him in his career as a 5-star recruit, even if he can just give capable starting minutes, as a Mountain West caliber player, that's going to be huge for this team and add some kind of size and some rebounding inside. And then I think Corey Manigault could be the X factor there. I think he could also play some at the 5. He actually might be my favorite to start at the 5 opening day, as Bragg will not be eligible until the second semester or until the first semester ends. But Manigault can put the ball on the floor a little bit. He rebounds and runs the floor pretty well. That could be a very, very dynamic offensive lineup with the shooters around him.
Yeah, I worried defensively there with a Manigault and rebounding. He only averaged about 3 rebounds a game at JUCO. Now, granted, it was at Indian Hills, which is a loaded program where guys are known for leaving Indian Hills and putting up bigger numbers than they were putting up at Indian Hills. But at the same time, I don't think expectations can be like too high for him as a 5. But I mean, when you talk about Carlton Bragg, I think we do kind of forget that amidst all the off the court trouble, he was an incredibly productive player for Kansas. Now playing in the highest levels of college basketball, 14 minutes a game, he was averaging 5 points and 4 boards on 51% shooting in his sophomore season. If you just bump that to 25 minutes a game, you're talking about a player who's averaging in that 10 points, 8 rebounds like Kansas. I think he's certainly going to be a Mountain West level player and draw enough attention. All he has to really do is be solid for them, because if he can just draw attention, they can space you out with all these guards and wings. You can put the ball on the deck. Anthony Mathis is going to get so many wide open looks because you're going to have Lyle, who's this slashing guard, and Jackson, who can shoot the ball and take you off the bounce, and Maluach, who was really good at the end of last season and really improved as the season went on. And they can go smaller if they want with Keith McGee, who I've heard a lot of people are pretty high on. He hasn't gotten to campus early enough where he could really impact summer practice, but at the same time, he's a real talent in terms of what he could provide. So I really look forward to seeing these 4-out 1-in looks once Bragg's eligible. The question is, can they hold down the fort until then? And as a Mountain West program that's going to need some wins in the non-conference to be an at-large type team, that's definitely a concern of mine if we're looking at NCAA tournament potential.
Yeah, so regarding Keith McGee, do you see him as a starter or like more of like a 6th man, or like what kind of impact do you expect from him?
My thought process on McGee right now is he comes off the bench as a scorer. My feel right now is it'll go Jaquan Lyle, Ant Mathis, Vance Jackson, Maluach, and then Bragg once he's eligible, probably Pinchuk before then.
Okay, and then in terms of another guy who is a veteran player who's been around a while, Dane Kuiper, I think his name is. I think that's how you pronounce that last name.
Yes, indeed.
He's like a 3-4 type. He didn't shoot the ball well last season, but he has in his past career. Where do you see him factoring in? Presumably off the bench. Do you think he could stick in the rotation? Maybe not average the 22 minutes or whatever he averaged last year, but maybe closer to 12 to 15.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's pretty solid defensively. which will help him stick in the rotation. If I were to kind of make my 2-deep rotation, if we're going to say 10 deep, which I think is a pretty kind of reasonable target for this team, let's just go on like the Bragg's playing thing where Bragg's the 5. I think I mentioned my starters. I think you then have McGee, Kuiper, Manigault, Pinchuk, and either if they're playing more small ball, a Drew Drennan, or if they're going to go bigger, perhaps like Kareem Ezzedine finds his way into the rotation.
Yeah, so I have the same as you for the top 10 with the 2 guys being left out being Ezzedine and Tavian Percy. I think that having 3 bigs get playing time off the bench, I think that's a little excessive. And then Kuiper's a guy who can play the 4 as well. So I think probably Bragg starting. That's Pinchuk will see some time there, and Manigault in terms of guys who can play the 4 and the 5 there. But this is a very interesting team. Certainly is going to be a great offensive team, even better than they were this past season. So where do you have them in the Mountain West, and then where do you have them kind of nationally?
So Mountain West, I've been on them at number 2. I think right now I trust them a little bit more than San Diego State, especially given you're counting on Carlton Bragg being present for all of Mountain West play. I think I'd have them number 2 in the Mountain West, probably in that like 40 to 45, 50 range nationally. So like slightly off, or right around that bubble cut line. I mean, if you figure there's 38 at-large or 36 at-large bids, and some of those will go to teams who are getting auto bids in that top 50. I think right around that at-large cut line is kind of my feel for this team. Talent-wise, this is to me a clearly at-large level team. Do you agree with that? Just on if you were to say, give me those names and just play pickup basketball.
I think I'd lean yes. Personally, I have them 3rd, but I have them and San Diego State, neck and neck pretty much. I have New Mexico as the top 3 seed in the NIT, which kind of puts them at about early 6, like maybe 62 or something in a national ranking. I think that the defense could be a concern, and then obviously we need to see Bragg put it all together. But certainly, even though they were 12-6 in the Mountain West last year, they are certainly leaps and bounds ahead of last year. I may even move them up a little bit. But I think a very appropriate kind of game to kind of prognosticate where we have New Mexico is trying to compare them to other bubble teams. So like in terms of New Mexico, or we'll say, how about Nebraska from last week? Who would you rather have if you're trying to project the preseason bracketology?
If you're talking rosters, I would prefer the roster that New Mexico has. If you're telling me which team would I rather bet on making the NCAA tournament, I think I'd probably bet on Nebraska just because A, opportunity, and B, Nebraska is a lot more proven than this team, especially given the fact New Mexico's chemistry has a chance to be really bad. Like, Paul Weir is going to have a heck of a job on his hands dealing with Vance Jackson, who I'm not saying is a bad chemistry guy, but came across to me a little bit as a me first player at UConn. And then Jaquan Lyle kicked off the team at Ohio State, basically, and Carlton Bragg, a mess of it in its own right off the floor. And then you're going to add in 3 JUCO players. Now, I don't like to make assumptions about JUCO players, but there have been teams that have went JUCO heavy and had chemistry problems in the past. And just the fact that they're newcomers is also a concern. And then 2 more freshmen. Like, there's not a lot of experience. There's not a ton of leadership. I mean, the 2 leaders of this team in terms of guys coming back would be Dane Kuiper and Anthony Mathis, neither of whom I think of as big vocal guys. Like I think that is like a legitimate concern that we haven't gotten a chance to discuss yet on the show.
Yeah, that's a very good point, especially, we touched on like individually their reputations, but we never kind of put it all together and say, wait, they have 3 guys right here. That is certainly a significant concern that I think a lot of people overlook, myself included. I mean, the big example of a team that's super talented, brings in a lot of newcomers, and kind of vastly underperforms was Oregon last year. That's kind of my go-to example. It's very top of mind. Team I had as a borderline top 25 team. I think I had them 27th coming into last year, and obviously they were nowhere close. I mean, they were probably in like the 70s, and they had roster full of talent and experience with guys like Mikhail McIntosh and Elijah Brown. They're kind of similar to this New Mexico team who brings in talented newcomers, but it's not like they're bringing in freshmen. They're bringing in guys who have been around the block. In terms of continuing this game, there's maybe a couple more examples. Would you rather have New Mexico or would you rather have Arizona?
That's tough. I think I'd bet Arizona there.
Yeah, I think I would too. Do you want to give one to me?
Yeah, I just have to think about it real quick of like a team that would really make sense in that kind of tier.
I've just been going with like I just pulled up my preseason bracketology and it's been going with teams around the cut line.
I'm really trying to think of a good.
How about would you rather have New Mexico or would you rather have Ohio State?
I would bet Ohio State, but that's more on like Holtman than like where I think their resume will be. I just think like he'll make them win. Alabama.
Baylor, you said?
Alabama.
Oh, I think I would still take Alabama. I really like that kind of like versatile, switchable, like defensive oriented lineup that they're going to throw out with Ingram, Jones, Mack, Petty, and Hall. I think that they have a lot of shooting there. I think that they could be really, really disruptive defensively.
I do think it's important to note with like, and I hate to do the like mid majors don't have a chance, but like it's super tough as a mid major. Like if you're anywhere near the cut line to get in, and like we're talking about them, like our projected tier has them right near the cut line with all of those teams. They're just not going to have the opportunities, and much of their non-conference schedule, they're going to play without Carlton Bragg and be without the front court. That's going to put them in a really vulnerable position. I don't know how realistic an at-large bid is, because I think they certainly have the talent to do so, but to put not only to put that talent together, but to put it together in a way where you're not going to have Carlton Bragg for a month. That you're in a coach who's in his only his third year of D1 head coaching experience. Now, Paul Weir's done a really good job in both of his years as a head coach, but he still has things to learn. This isn't a guy with a ton of experience that we can count on just getting guys to play together. It's not a Mike Bray or a Roy Williams or a Bill Self. It's really tough for me to project an at-large bid. Now, do they have the talent to do so? Yes. Do they have the talent to win the Mountain West tournament? Absolutely. Especially given the fact that Nevada will likely be safe come tournament time. Is that where you're at? That they're borderline NCAA tournament team lean now?
Yeah, so I have them as the 9th team out. So just like going through like the 8 teams that I have ahead of them, who I also have out, are in. So I have Ohio State, Seton Hall, Missouri, San Diego State, Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, Butler, and Minnesota. So I think that they have comparable talent to those teams. I think they may even have more talent than like a Butler or even like a Notre Dame, which kind of has a lot of young talent. But regarding like the Mountain West and like their chances like within the conference, I kind of wrote a short article the other day after Oregon and Boise State kind of announced that they had this in season home and home, where I think it was December 15th, they're going to play whatever at Oregon, and then December 29th, just 2 weeks later, they're going to play at Boise State. And I was talking about this on Twitter with Rocco Miller, who's like a big Northwest basketball guy, and we kind of both came to the conclusion that the only reason that Oregon would kind of pursue that series with Boise State is that they would think that they would be a top 75 team. Therefore, beating them on the road would give them quadrant one. But there's no way that Boise State's going to come anywhere close. I mean, I have Boise State sixth in the Mountain West. So I have them below that big three, and then Fresno State and UNLV. So that might not even be top 100 there when you kind of project out like a full NIT, and that's even going up to that top 75 buffer. And I think I would definitely rather have teams like Marshall or Iowa or like South Carolina over Boise State. So that just kind of shows like if a team that's middle of the pack in the conference isn't even looking like an NIT team in terms of like their overall roster, that whole bottom half is just a huge minefield.
Right. I mean, realistically, you're looking at, in terms of chances, you're looking at beating Nevada either at home or road will be a Q1, unless something changes with this team drastically. Beating San Diego State on the road would be a Q1, more than likely. Beating them at home, unlikely to be a Q1, but it could be. And that's probably it in terms of Q1 opportunities. They'll probably get a couple in the non-conference. I don't know their schedule. I don't believe it's out. But I would expect, let's say they get 2 opportunities or 3 opportunities for Q1s. It becomes a really tough game to play if you're New Mexico when you're talking about maybe 6-7 opportunities all season.
Yeah, so I thought I had found New Mexico's non-conference schedule, but that was New Mexico State's. So I will do one more search, and I don't think I can. Yeah, I don't think it's out yet.
I don't even remember any like specific games that would be like of note. Like I don't remember like a release. Like I know they had Arizona last year, which was like a big game that they had them at home. I don't know if there's a return game involved there. There might be. That might be an interesting game with 2 bubble teams. Let me see if I can pull up any information. I'm going to check
an article that they have in February 28th of 2017, they scheduled a home and home with Colorado. So presumably that would be the second game would be this season.
That's a good point. I'm trying
that's not even like a great game though. Like Colorado's borderline top 75 in at least in my opinion.
I think they could be better than that. But I agree that, I mean, if you were on the road at Colorado, was that you were saying, or were they going to be at home against Colorado?
The series begins in Boulder in the 17-18 season, and then the Lobos would host the Buffaloes in the 18-19. So they get them at home.
Okay.
So definitely not going to be a quadrant one.
Unless McKinley Wright goes nuts.
Yeah. What's the RPI cutoff for a quadrant 2 at home? Do you know by chance?
Quadrant 2 at home? I think it's either 75 or 100.
Yeah, because I know quadrant 1s are top 30 at home, top 50 on neutral, top 75 on the road. I have to memorize these quadrants. I don't know them well enough.
I'm trying to pull up the D1 docket, and I can't seem to swipe over to the Mountain West to truly give you the answer. Let me try real quick to see if I can get the D1 docket up. This is just live us being weird on the podcast, trying to figure out the schedule. I generally think we can assume that they don't have that they're not going to have the depth of a schedule that provides them a legit at-large chance, especially given that Bragg won't be there.
Yeah, so I have quadrant 1. Home top 30, neutral 50, away 75, and then quadrant 2. Quadrant 2 for home is 75, neutral 100, away 135. Yeah, so they're probably a quadrant 2, but even that's kind of close.
I apologize in earnest for that. I believe when I left to get the D1 docket up, I got signed out of Google. So that's a pretty big problem. But as I was saying, couldn't confirm anything else. So I think that's...
I don't know if people heard me when I said this, but I found the quadrants again. Quadrant 2, home up to 75. So there is a chance that Colorado... There's a pretty good chance that Colorado at home would be a quadrant 2 game, and then neutral up to 100 and away up to 135.
Excellent. So our consensus on New Mexico is Paul Weir has this thing going in the right direction. This is going to be a really good program. The Mountain West is back. I think that's kind of in the talk, is that the Mountain West is back. This core is really talented. The chemistry is a concern. We both think this is a top 3 Mountain West team. I think almost everyone does. I have them at 2. You have them at 3. We both have them outside of the tournament picture, but not that far out where they couldn't make that push. And that a lack of opportunity will be what kind of halts them in the tracks from the very end, if as much as anything else.
Yep, I think that will do it for tonight. Kevin and I will think of 2 more compelling teams that have some interesting discussion points to do for next week. And thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you. We will have a special guest next week unless something falls through, which we very much hope does not happen after we've been really trying to get this guy on the show. We're really excited about him. So be sure to tune in. I don't want to obviously release the guest name in case we do lose him, but plans are it's on his calendar from what I hear. So we'll see what we can do. Thanks for listening, everybody. Sorry about any connection issues that we had on this podcast. I should be able to edit most of it out, but if I can't, once again, my apologies. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed watching Jimmer play basketball. His TBT run is over. I don't know, Brad, if that was a spoiler for you, man. Sorry about that. And have a great night.